We're here because free speech is under attack. We're here because people are being convinced that socialism works. We're here because people are being judged guilty until proven innocent. We are fighting back with facts. This is not a safe zone, so buckle up, Buttercup. This is the raw, naked truth.
Russian troop movements. The Harris campaign changes news headlines. Japan to get a new prime minister, and more. Welcome to the Raw Naked Truth. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin, and here's the news you need to know. Russia is withdrawing some of its military forces from Ukraine to respond to a Ukrainian offensive into Russian territory, U.S. officials said, the first sign that Kiev's incursion is forcing Moscow to rejigger its invasion force. The officials said the U.S. is still seeking to determine the significance of Russia's move and didn't say how many troops the U.S. assesses Russia is shifting. But the new U.S. assessment bolsters claims by Ukrainian officials who said last week's surprise invasion of Kursk had drawn Russian forces away from Ukraine, where Moscow's advantage in manpower and equipment is allowing them to grind forward in several places. Ukraine, meanwhile, sent tanks and other armored vehicles to reinforce troops that have stunned the Kremlin by seizing a chunk of Russian territory. Vice President Harris's team is now crafting an economic policy framework without abandoning the failed Biden-Harris proposals, focused on making housing more affordable, lowering costs for families, taking on corporate excess, and boosting small business, according to people involved in the discussions. The plan is intended to make her priorities clear to voters amid criticism that she hasn't presented a detailed agenda during her first few weeks on the campaign trail. But aides said the exact contours of the plan are still in flux, just days after Harris told reporters that she planned to release a policy platform this week, a time frame that surprised some of her advisors. Harris is expected to test drive her messaging during a Friday speech in Raleigh, North Carolina, that will focus on decreasing costs and confronting alleged price gouging. As vice president, Harris cast the deciding vote on the excessive government spending that triggered historic inflation. After a spokesperson for the Harris campaign said in a Friday statement that vice presidential candidate Tim Walz does not have a personal relationship with Assad Zaman of the Muslim American Society of Minnesota, footage has surfaced showing Tim Walz calling the Muslim cleric who promoted a pro-Adolf Hitler film a master teacher who offered Walz lessons over the time they spent together. The footage is from a 2018 event unearthed by the Washington Examiner. The campaign denial was in response to a Washington Examiner report on how Walz repeatedly hosted the imam at events as the governor of Minnesota. I would like to first of all say thank you to Imam, Walz said at the unearthed 2018 event, which was hosted by Minnesota's Muslim American Society on February 16, 2018, at the South Metro Islamic Center in Rosemont, Minnesota. The Harris campaign is modifying headlines on news articles within sponsored search advertisements on Google to appear as if those outlets are supporting her presidential bid and whitewashing her record. The ad tactic does not violate Google's policy, but does raise questions for some. The ads, which were first reported by Axios, include headlines and descriptions that mimic a real news article. Newsweek reviewed several of the advertisements through Google's Ad Transparency Center. Some of the news outlets included in the advertisements include NPR, Reuters, The Guardian, and the Associated Press. Axios reported that the ad technique is often used in commercial advertising and that mimicking news search results does not violate Google's policies. In one example, which Harris campaign bought to appear on Google from August 7th to August 13th, The ad shows a link to Reuters with the headline, "Inflation is Down." The description of the sponsored post reads, "Under the Biden-Harris administration, the U.S. is winning the inflation fight." This description was never published by Reuters. Approximately 40% of the biggest manufacturing investments announced in the first year of the Biden administration have been delayed or paused due to deteriorating market conditions, slowing demand, and a lack of policy certainty in a high-stakes election year, according to a Financial Times investigation. President Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act and CHIPS and Science Act offered more than $400 billion in tax credits, loans, and grants to spark development of a domestic clean tech and semiconductor supply chain to revitalize the Rust Belt and help the country better compete with China. However, at least $84 billion in those projects have been delayed or paused indefinitely. The delays raise questions around whether an industrial transformation can deliver jobs and economic returns to the U.S. It also casts doubt on the Biden policies and whether or not they were based in realistic projections or hopes and dreams. Japan is set to get a new leader this fall after Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said Wednesday he would not seek to stay in office. Kishida, 67, has bolstered relations with the U.S. and South Korea during his 3 years in office, and under his leadership, Japan is nearly doubling its military spending to counter the growing threat from China. But at home, his popularity was hit by a political funds scandal involving ruling party heavyweights and relatively high inflation. At a news conference, Kishida said he wouldn't seek re-election as leader of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party in an election set for September. Traditionally, the LDP leader concurrently holds the position of prime minister or head of government. Once the party picks its new leader, it is expected to use its control of parliament to make that person prime minister. That's the Raw Naked Truth. You can catch every episode of The Raw Naked Truth at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech. We'll see you next time.